I am Jamie Thibodeaux. I have been here to testify before. We have worked over several years on revising the STAR test to make it a little bit more reasonable, and so that's kind of going to be where the focus of the process standards are for my testimony. I have been teaching for 11 years in third grade. 9 of those years were math teaks. Before the revisions, I taught 35 math skills, 28 were tested. After the revisions, I taught 44 math skills, 42 were tested. Many of the skills were moved from upper levels and are rigorous in themselves just because the level of the math that is required of some of our younger students. For example, a fourth grade comparing fractions with unlike denominators. Students are expected to have an understanding of equivalent fractions and also an understanding of their basic math facts. Hopefully in third grade they had time to learn their multiples. It's a several step process just to be able to make both fractions the same and then compare them. So that skill in itself is rigorous. I would also like to add that a lot of the content standards actually already have problem solving wording in them. For example, in fourth grade standard 4.3F, the standard is evaluate reasonableness of sums and differences of fractions using benchmark fractions. That is not a process standard, that's a content standard. Another standard is 4.4H, solve with fluency 1 to 2 step problems involving multiplication and division. So what I'm saying is that that's also not a process standard, that is a content standard. And so removing process standards from the STAR test is not going to remove problem solving from the STAR test. You will still have that because of the content standards. What we're starting to see because of the level of the number of teaks that we're having is that there's more of a push for problem solving and less of a push for practice. In the handout that I gave you, I gave a copy actually of that same workbook that we have in third grade, and what you'll notice is there's a it's very lacking in practice. There's a lot of words, there's a lot of models, there's a lot of pictures to teach a skill, but very little practice. And one of the things that we're fearing is that we're losing out on the skills because we're spending so much time trying to get those kids to take it to the next level. And because of the number of skills, we don't have enough time to get them there. And again, a lot of the skills already have the problem solving in them. So because a lot of the teaks already include that, I would actually propose that process standards be removed from STAR testing to allow teachers to focus at the rigorous level the teaks are already written. For the practice of the skills, the problem solving will remain in the test. It will still be there, but then you won't necessarily have a problem solving skill that also has another problem solving process standard on top of it. That's where you tend to get those confusing, wonky questions where they add too many steps or too many standards into one question. Another issue is that some of the fifth grade math teaks and some of the other math teaks that are content standards do emphasize models, and that's probably where you're seeing a lot of the Common Core questioning. So what's happening is that those skills are being tested on the STAR test, and because they're being tested on the STAR test, those students are required to master the understanding of a model rather than actually find an answer. In my handout, I also have some examples of a fifth grade STAR test question. We showed one of these at a math meeting at our school. And one for example would be the number line that we have here. The kids are supposed to find which number line best models the expression 3 divided by 1/3. Well, if you can do the standard algorithm, then you would know that 3 divided by 1/3 is 9. But many students, and you'll see 37% of students chose C because they knew that the answer was 9. But the correct answer was B because it was 9 1/3 pieces. If I would ask that maybe we could reevaluate some of those fifth grade. I have a copy of the fifth grade math standards. There's 5 different supporting standards that require kids to represent a math using model, and I'm not opposed to representing the math using the model, but I'm opposed to testing the math using the model. So I'm good with introducing it. We do need models. You have to introduce the skill using models. You introduce it with models, you practice the skill, and then ultimately the goal is to get them to perform with precision and accuracy. And my problem is that our STAR test is not testing precision and accuracy. It's actually testing whether or not they can choose a model, and I don't feel like that's appropriate. So I would request that some of those skills be reevaluated, and maybe the ones that require us to represent a specific model be pulled from the testable standards. That way in classrooms, we'll still be teaching those models, but the models won't be the end goal. They'll just be part of the process of getting them to understand.
That's the end of your time. Let's see if any board members have any questions. Mr. Mercer?
Thank you for being, and I apologize, I did not recognize you at first. One of my favorite ISDs, Wimberley, and who helped testify about the length of the test being 3 and 4 hours for third graders. Thanks. And members, they actually, several of the examples that I provided y'all that came from the test, comparing this to some of the Singapore type questions came from Wimberley. Thank you for that.
Yes,
the first question on the model you're showing me on page, whatever, with the analysis of the 5.3. Again, you're saying the answer, and I see the answer is 9, but the answer is 3 sets of 3, 9, B. Well, 42% got it right. 37% of them knew it was 9 and chose C.
Exactly.
But they got it wrong on here. So they knew the answer, but didn't understand the process. Have you ever heard this board talk about inch wide and mile? Was it mile wide and inch deep?
That is exactly what we're saying. We've got so much content to try to cover that we're not able to actually get it up to this level at all times. We try the best that we can, but as you saw, our textbooks are quite long, and there's not enough time in a school year to fully teach all of those skills. And so, like I said, what's happening is you're starting to get more problem solving shoved in before students have had an opportunity to really master some of the skills, like multiplication and 2-by-1 digit multiplication, and some of the skills that are foundational, fractions and understanding of fractions, so that they can go to 4th grade and be able to compare those fractions and already have ideas of that. But the year is short in comparison to the TEKS, and so we're struggling with that. But again, one of the biggest, I think, reliefs would be in potentially removing some of the process standards from the STAR testing, and that way teachers are still having process standards. We're still problem solving with our students, but then some of the questions will be more fair for our students. They'll still be problem solving. We still have TEKS that require them to solve word problems in 1 and 2 steps. So they'll still have that level, but it just won't be quite as confusing.
That's why I refer to that mile wide and inch deep again. I'm hearing, but I'm not going to misquote you, but if you remove the process standards, you can focus on the skills, the content.
Exactly.
Am I being a fair quote? Remove the process standards, and my classroom educators can focus on the skills, and then the how, you decide when you bring in charts and graphs, whatever. Is that a true statement?
Yes, and I mean, we would still have those process standards, so we would still be teaching certain models.
Yes.
But we would use that as a means to an end, not the end itself.
And you would choose that as a classroom educator, which would be the right means.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Jamie, I'm sorry, Jamie.
Yeah, Ms. Cargill?
3rd grade.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I don't know how it happens or how it's done in Wimberley, but the placement of the process skills at the top in every introduction, and then also they're mentioned again in every knowledge and skills statement. Does that affect how your district instructs you to teach your children? In other words, do you feel like you have to take every single process skill and apply it to every single part of every content standard, or you just go by the SEs with the content in the SEs?
We pretty much go mostly by the SEs because there is not time to problem solve every one of those skills with all of those process standards in one school year. It'd be impossible. So what we do is we take the SEs, we focus on the skill itself. We try to spend time getting them to master the skill, and once they have, then we introduce some of those problem solving examples, but we're having like crunch time trying to get all of that in. And those skills are important. Problem solving is important too, and we're not taking away from that. We agree with that, but we just want it to be fair and considering the number of skills we're trying to get in.
Right, okay, and so that's why you're focused more on what's on the test, which we were talking about earlier.
Right.
More of the naked math versus all the word problems with all the process skills in them.
Exactly,
Okay.
and there would
All
still
right.
be word problems because it is one of our content standards.
So, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
concern is, and fortunately, this will be a next year to do item instead of a this year to do item, so my concern really is alleviated quickly, but if we leave the process standards in the standards at all, they are subject to being tested. And so we find ourselves in a catch-22. I don't think anybody is advocating taking them out entirely. And we've heard from testing staff that if they're in the standards, they will continue to be on the test, and we have no jurisdiction over the test. So help us find the balance of making sure the kids are taught those standards without them being overly emphasized or over-tested when we can't control how the teachers teach it or how the state tests it. We're kind of the middleman here, to use a poor analogy.
Well, I guess I'm confused because there was a time when we had skills and we didn't test them all. We had 35 skills and we only tested 28. And so I think, I've spent time studying some of the laws, and I'm trying to find where it is that specifically says that every skill has to be tested. Because before we didn't test all skills. And so I'm just kind of curious as to that. Again, we do still have a lot of problem-solving standards in the content. The content itself lends itself to problem-solving. It's even written in the wording of the content. So even if you did remove the problem-solving standards, you're not removing problem-solving from our curriculum. It's there. It's just not at the top of the document. When they are tested on those skills, they're still going to be tested on word problems in 1 to 2 step, because that's one of my 3rd grade skills I have to teach. It's one of my content standards. They're going to take a perimeter, and they're going to get several different sides, and they're going to have to problem solve that missing piece based on the total and all the other sides. That's a pretty rigorous skill for a 3rd grader. And the problem itself is problem solving. So I don't feel like that necessarily removing process standards is going to remove problem solving from our Texas kids. They're still going to have problem solving. It's just going to take the extra layer of problem solving off of them. And then it's also going to give a little bit more freedom to focus on some of the content standards and get our kids to know what they're supposed to do. And especially in the primary grades, I have a 1st grader. And some of the homework that I see that's multi-step, and I know it's a multiplication problem and then an addition problem, and I'm shocked because I really am just working on doubles with her. Like 8 plus 8, let's get that down, baby girl. And so but instead we're doing these extra steps, and as a 3rd grade teacher, I don't necessarily want the lower grades focusing on all of that stuff. I'd really like for them to really be focusing on number concepts, because some of the kids that I'm getting don't have an understanding of a number line, and not because they're not being taught, but because there's so much stuff that's getting shoved and so much push for this problem solving and these word problems that they're not getting the basic understanding that they need to do the math that I need them to do.
So is your concern, I want to make sure I'm trying to be a good listener, your concern is how it's being tested on the STAR test?
Yes.
As well as the sheer volume of standards, not necessarily the process standards in and of themselves, but them compounded with the volume of the total amount of content in an academic school year.
I agree. The only process standard I have a problem with is the one that asks the kids to problem solve in everyday life in the workplace. From kindergarten to 6th grade, or from kindergarten to 8th grade, they're supposed to problem. I have a hard time with our ELL students getting them to understand sometimes an amusement park if they've never been, or a zoo, getting that background knowledge for them. But we're going to throw some word problems at these kids or get them to problem solve in the workplace, where some of these kids have never been in the workplace. I have a real problem, and that one actually, I do have a copy. That one is straight verbatim from the Common Core. That one absolutely is, and I don't think it's appropriate. It's not appropriate process standard. The previous process standard that we have was for students to solve problems connected to everyday experiences and activities in and outside of school. That would be appropriate. We're still going to struggle to get background knowledge for some of those kids who don't have that background knowledge. But why do they need to problem solve in everyday life, society, and the workplace? It's not an appropriate language for K through 6. So that is, but other than that, I'm not opposed to problem solving or process standards. I'm just, like you said, opposed to how the number of skills that we have and the way that we're testing them.
Thank you.